This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Welcome to the program. Joining me now is John Brummett, columnist with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Obviously, the pandemic has ratcheted back up. The governor declaring another pandemic emergency, and that in some way forces John Brummett and I to visit via Zoom. Good to see you, sir.
Well, I'm sorry we're having to do it this way, but it's convenient and it's better than nothing, and that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes. All right. So the governor has been having some community conversations. A couple of them in the last week have been extremely heated. I just kind of want to get your take of what you witnessed from what you either read or saw from Mountain Home and Siloam Springs in terms of the governor trying to have a civil conversation with people, but it didn't seem to be too civil.
Yeah. Months ago, a few years ago, I would have been confident in saying that the general public effect of this, the political fallout of it, is that the governor is winning a lot of goodwill for facing these critics, enduring their primitive rudeness with patience and forbearance. And I still think that's so. I've just become steadily less confident in what I've always known because of the ever worsening political mood and temperament. But I still think and would submit that, and I hear more, that Asa Hutchinson deserves our respect for trying to do as much of the right thing as he can make himself do, considering his politics, and for standing in, going to the people, standing before them, and rather remarkably, because people literally remarked on it, being patient as these people yell really horribly mistaken things. And the more mistaken these things are, the more loud and certain the people seem who espouse it. That the vaccine causes infertility, nonsense, that the vaccine is a fraud, as we heard in Siloam Springs, that you could take some kind of crazy animal medicine. I don't know, things I dare not even mouth. And I think if there's any effect at all, it's not negative for the governor, at least, and perhaps positive, and not negative for the side of responsible conduct. And we can hope that's the case.
I'm not sure if it's changing public attitudes at those actual forums. I've yet to see somebody kind of swung over to the other side as a result of that conversation. But when you look at the statistics, there are increases in vaccinations across the state, but I think it has more to do with the death rate and hospitalizations more than anything else. Am I off base in that observation?
No, I made a mistake, a tactical reportorial mistake when Hutchinson, forgive me, when Hutchinson began calling these things. I went to the first one over in Cabot. There was only like 36 hours notice, and mainly civic-minded people showed up, and there was no conflict. Word got around, and then then in some of the more conservative areas, there has been conflict. But even at Mountain Home, where there was the first incident of yelling, that came from what everybody there, or people there who I talked to, described as a small group. And there were 154 vaccines before and after the vaccinations, before the meeting. At Cabot, there had been one. They took a vaccine team over there and one person was vaccinated. So, and the vaccines are up. What I was getting ready to say, and before I went off on my anecdotal references, is that Hutchinson's town hall meetings have become more interesting, but they remain kind of non-events, and the vaccines are up, not as much as I'd like them, but they're up because people are getting afraid. And I just think that's what's happening. And if that's what it takes, reports that you can't get in the hospital even if you need to go, I think that's causing it to come up, and they're exceeding. Arkansas's vaccination rate is not what it ought to be, but it's higher than the other hottest states, Florida and Louisiana. So looking for positive news where we can, we'll cite that.
As the governor said, fear is probably the best motivator at this point.
Right.
So he has
Right.
declared a new pandemic emergency, which will have to get legislative approval to stay in effect. I think it's a 60-day emergency is what he declared. Very narrowly tailored. If you read the proclamation on there, it's really geared towards freeing up some healthcare resources, either cutting through some red tape, allowing some retired personnel to come back out of retirement. Does that proclamation go far enough in your estimation?
Well,
I guess what I'm asking is, should we go back to the days of shutting down some particular businesses or implementing some things that would be a lot more controversial?
You've asked me a question that is hard for the governor, and it's hard for me. In an ideal world, in an ideal political temperament, we would probably go farther. There would be more behavioral and activity restrictions than we have. But I think a couple of things have happened. One, we've got a new legislature which simply will not allow that. And two, as hard as it was to pull back and quarantine ourselves the first time, having to go back, I'm just not sure if that's a practical thing to try to do. So what Hutchinson has decided is to declare an emergency just for the ability of his emergency agency people to work with the hospitals to try to handle what is a legitimate emergency, and see if the legislature will at least go along with that, and then do everything we can to ratchet up the vaccines, and then try, which is where I guess you're going, try it as hard as we can to get the legislature to give our schools the power to choose, if they choose, to protect our children in schools beginning in here in a couple weeks. That seems to be where we are.
And that is the crux of the special session that the governor's going to call, is to
Right.
repeal, or I guess modify, Act 1002-1002, which is the mask mandate ban. Give me the odds today. What do you think the odds are that the legislature says we're going to modify it some to allow for some local school board action?
Well, I actually talked to some people 24 hours ago who said not there yet, not a majority in either chamber. My ability to predict this legislature is not nearly on par with my ability to predict past legislatures. I'll say this. The governor doesn't have much influence. The governor's doing the best that he can. He's calling the session. He's narrowly defining the reason for it, which is to protect kids under 12 who can't get vaccinated. He's trying to give a logical, narrow path. I'm interested in the approach of Senator Jonathan Dismang, leader of the Senate for a decade or more, the guy who probably was more instrumental than anybody in designing the private option to get us out of the Medicaid expansion quagmire. He came on Twitter Saturday and he said, I'm open to repealing this mask mandate in some sort of restrictive way because, and here's how he cast the issue. It's not that the schools all the schools will go out and impose a mask mandate before school starts, but what we need is if we have outbreaks in schools will have only one recourse, which is to shut down. That, he says, would cause mom and dad to be inconvenienced in terms of their work. That, he says, would cause small businesses and our employers to be inconvenienced. That, he says, could affect all of our attempted return to economic normalcy. So he's catching it as an economic issue for everybody, and only this. If we have a problem, schools will need this tool. Don't you want them to have some tool other than harming our economy? If you're not trusting that public health will be successful when pitted against economic considerations, then you need to conjoin them, and that's what he's doing. And I don't know if he personally has the kind of influence he had when he was president pro tem for 2 terms and when he led the way on the private option, But that kind of thinking is the only thing that I think can prevail out there, and I give it at least an even chance. I've got to give it at least an even chance.
All right. So you also have another faction of the Republican legislature, and if you read some of the social media posts of, say, Senator Trent Garner or Senator Dan Sullivan, you see a resistance to this loosening of the mask mandates. So is there no compromise on their behalf in your estimation, or do you see some path that they might say we can let a little bit of leniency go here?
I haven't even pondered one. Have you pondered some sort of middle ground? How do you give schools the mere option for a mask mandate and limit it to kids under 12, elementary schools? What? I mean, I don't know. I have to admit to you, I've not pondered how you compromise on that basic question. The issue is, should schools have flexibility? And where is the middle ground on? That's a compromised position anyway. We're not doing mask mandates. The governor got ridiculed nationally for saying we have an emergency in Arkansas and we're wide open. A lot of people thought that was the most outrageous, self-contradictory thing they'd ever heard. It sort of makes sense if you're here, what he meant. I don't know. I don't see any. You either have to give the school districts the compromised position of local control or not. Any ideas you have or others? I'd love to hear them or consider them.
Yeah, I don't have a solution. I'm trying to analyze some of the different factions that are out there. You also have the Democrats out there that are pushing for this flexibility for school districts at the local level. Do they want things to go even further, or do they understand, are they pragmatic and realistic enough to go, if we could just get enough Republicans to give local control to these school boards, that's going to be a victory enough?
That's victory. That's victory enough. I've not talked to any of them. I've read some of their social media, Democrats that is, but I don't see them saying this is insufficient, we're going to move for something more. I just don't think the stomach is there for that. The will may be, but not the stomach. So I think it's a simple question. Can we persuade, can we define this flexibility, this local control for school districts on mask mandates in a way that has some, that can be sold in terms of helping all of us return to or continue to behave normally in terms of our economy. I think that's the only winner I see.
I would say that by week's end or this time next week, we will have plenty to talk about. There will be quite a few developments between now and then.
It's going to be a wild and revealing week, isn't it?
All right. He's John Brummett, columnist with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Thank you, sir.
See you next time.
That's all for the program. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Roby Brock. We'll see you next time.